The dog tags look like they came from a surplus store on Eastern Avenue, the kind that sells fake medals to frauds who never served a day in their lives. Judge Wendell Harrington III spoke the words slowly, savoring each syllable as his voice carried through the silent courtroom. He leaned forward on the bench, black robes pooling around him like oil spreading across water, and fixed his gaze on the old man standing in the defendant's box below. Courtroom 4B of the Baltimore City District Court smelled of old paper, floor polish, and the particular kind of despair that accumulates in places where hope goes to die. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead in an arrhythmic pattern that had persisted for 6 years because no one in city maintenance considered it a priority. The radiators clanked and hissed against the February cold seeping through windows that had not been properly sealed since the building's last renovation in 1987. 12 people sat scattered across the gallery's wooden benches, some awaiting their own cases, others simply seeking shelter from the freezing rain that had been falling since dawn. The defendant stood motionless. His name, according to the docket, was Elias Kiptanui Okonkwo, and he had been charged with criminal trespassing after seeking shelter in an abandoned warehouse on the night of January 29th when temperatures dropped to 4 degrees below zero. He wore a flannel shirt that had been donated by a church outreach program, the fabric worn thin at the elbows and held together at one seam with silver duct tape. His boots had seen better decades. His face, weathered and lined by years that seemed to number far more than the 71 listed in his file, betrayed nothing of what passed behind his eyes. Those eyes, however, betrayed everything to anyone trained to recognize it. They moved in a continuous sweep across the room, cataloging exits, noting positions, measuring distances. The bailiff standing near the side door, the court reporter at her station, the assistant prosecutor shuffling papers, the public defender, a young woman barely 2 years out of law school, who kept glancing at her client with an expression caught somewhere between pity and confusion. The old man absorbed all of it without appearing to look at anything at all. Harrington straightened his reading glasses and made a show of examining the file before him. He had occupied this bench for 34 years, and he had developed certain techniques for managing his courtroom. Public humiliation, he had discovered, served as an excellent deterrent. It also provided a satisfying break in the monotony of processing the endless parade of vagrants, addicts, and petty criminals who washed through his jurisdiction like debris carried on a polluted tide. "I ask you a question," the judge continued, his voice rising slightly for the benefit of the gallery. "Those tags around your neck, where did you purchase them? Was it the surplus store, or perhaps one of those websites that sells military memorabilia to people who want to pretend they served?" The public defender rose to her feet. Her voice wavered but held. "Your Honor, my client is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. His status is documented in the pretrial services report, and I would ask that the court extend appropriate respect to his service record." Harrington's laugh was a practiced sound, designed to invite others to join in the ridicule. It worked. Several people in the gallery offered nervous chuckles, eager to align themselves with power. The judge waved a dismissive hand toward the young attorney. "Counselor," he said, "I have sat on this bench for over 3 decades. I have seen more homeless men claiming to be veterans than I have seen actual veterans claiming to be homeless. Everyone who ends up in that box has a story. Everyone has an excuse. And more than half of them have purchased some kind of military prop to generate sympathy from soft-hearted fools who do not understand how the system works." He turned his attention back to the defendant. The old man had not moved. His breathing remained slow and even. His hands rested at his sides with a stillness that seemed almost unnatural, the kind of stillness that takes years of training to achieve and a lifetime of practice to maintain. "Now," the judge continued, "I'm going to ask you directly. Those dog tags, are they genuine military issue, or are they costume jewelry? Before we continue with this story, we would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop a comment below with your city or country. Stories of hidden heroes like this happen in every community, maybe even in yours. You might have a quiet legend in your own neighborhood whose humble appearance hides an extraordinary story of service and sacrifice. If tales of courage, resilience, and second chances speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us to share more incredible true stories that honor the forgotten heroes among us. Now, let us continue. The old man lifted his head slightly. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the silent courtroom with perfect clarity. "With respect, Your Honor," he said, "I would prefer not to remove them." Harrington's eyes narrowed. The refusal, delivered with such quiet dignity, seemed to irritate him more than open defiance would have. He glanced toward the bailiff, a broad-shouldered man named Darnell Whitmore, who wore his own service ribbons pinned to his uniform, then back to the defendant. "Let me explain something to you," the judge said, his voice dropping to a register that promised consequences. "This is my courtroom. When I ask a question, I expect an answer. When I give an instruction, I expect compliance. You stand before me accused of trespassing, of taking shelter in a building that did not belong to you, of believing that the rules which govern civilized society somehow do not apply to people in your situation." He leaned forward, and his voice rose again to its theatrical volume. "So I will ask you one more time. Those tags, are they real, or are they the props of a man who has given up on himself and now expects the rest of us to carry him?" The bailiff, Whitmore, watched the exchange with growing unease. Something about the old man's bearing triggered a memory he could not quite place. The way the defendant held himself, the almost imperceptible shift in his weight as the judge spoke, the calm that seemed less like resignation and more like restraint. Whitmore had seen that posture before. He had been trained by men who moved like that decades ago, in a place where precision meant survival and stillness meant the difference between a successful operation and a body bag. The defendant's eyes met the judge's. There was no defiance in them, no anger, only something ancient and unyielding that made Harrington, for just a moment, feel as though he were the one being evaluated. In exactly 43 minutes, Judge Wendell Harrington III would understand what it means to demand that a ghost remove his armor. But he did not know that yet, and so he smiled his practiced smile and waited for the old man to break. The old man did not break. He simply stood there, steady as stone, and let the silence speak for him. The fluorescent lights above the defendant's box hummed their discordant tune, and Elias Okonkwo felt the years fall away like leaves stripped from a tree by winter wind. The judge was speaking again, something about respect for the court and consequences for obstruction, but the words faded into the background static of memory. Elias was no longer standing in a Baltimore courtroom. He was 18 years old, standing at the gates of Camp Lejeune with a duffel bag over his shoulder and his father's disappointment burning in his chest. Kiptanui Okonkwo Sr. had been a diplomat, a man of words and negotiation, of carefully constructed sentences and strategic silences. He had fled Kenya during the political upheavals of the 1960s, built a new life in America, married a Baltimore schoolteacher named Grace who saw the world in terms of what her students could become rather than what they were. Together, they had raised Elias to believe in the power of education, of reasoned discourse, of solving problems with intellect rather than force. The day Elias told his father he had enlisted in the Marine Corps, the old man did not shout. He simply looked at his son with eyes that held generations of accumulated wisdom and said, "You will see things that will change you. Make sure they change you into someone your mother would still recognize." Grace Okonkwo had died of stroke 3 months before Elias shipped out to basic training. He never got to show her the man he would become. He carried that weight through every deployment, every operation, every moment when the crosshairs settled on a target and his finger tightened on the trigger. Would she still recognize him? He was never certain. Camp Lejeune stripped away everything soft. The drill instructors saw something in the quiet young man for Baltimore, something in the way he listened more than he spoke, in the patience that seemed bred into his bones, in the steadiness of his hands when others trembled. They pushed him toward reconnaissance training, and reconnaissance pushed him toward the sniper program, and the sniper program revealed what Elias had always suspected about himself. He was capable of a stillness so profound that the world itself seemed to hold its breath around him. By 1983, he had earned his first commendation. By 1985, he was an instructor at Quantico, teaching young Marines the art of becoming invisible. That was the year he met Celeste. She was a Navy nurse, stationed at the base hospital, and she had a way of looking at him that suggested she could see straight through the camouflage he wore even in civilian clothes. He came to her ward after a training accident, a minor injury that required stitches and observation, and she sat with him through the night while the morphine loosened his tongue. "You carry ghosts," she told him as dawn light crept through the hospital windows. "I can see them in your eyes. How many lives do you carry, Elias Okonkwo?" He told her the truth because he could not seem to lie to her. 14, he said. 14 confirmed. More that were never confirmed. More that I try not to count. She took his hand then, her fingers warm against his cold skin. "And you carry them all," she said. "Every single one." They were married in 1986, a small ceremony on the beach near Quantico with only a handful of friends in attendance. His father did not come. The disappointment had calcified into distance by then, a gulf that would never fully close. But Celeste was there, radiant in a simple white dress, and when she spoke her vows, Elias felt something unlock in his chest that he had not known was sealed. The years that followed were a blur of deployments and homecomings, of classified briefings and redacted reports, of letters written in hotel rooms across 3 continents and phone calls that said nothing because nothing could be said on unsecured lines. Celeste waited. She always waited. And when he came home carrying new ghosts, new weights, new silences, she would take his hand and sit with him through the long nights until he remembered how to breathe. In 1987, they assigned him a new spotter. Corporal Tomas Miguel Espinoza was 23 years old, born and raised in the Bronx, and he talked more in a single hour than Elias spoke in a week. He was loud where Elias was quiet, gregarious where Elias was reserved, combustible where Elias was measured. On paper, they should have been a disaster. In practice, they were perfect. Tomas had an eye for wind patterns that bordered on supernatural. He could read terrain the way other men read newspapers, absorbing information at a glance and translating it into precise calculations that made impossible shots merely improbable. More importantly, he understood Elias in a way that few people ever had. He knew when to fill the silence with chatter and when to let the quiet stretch between them like a held breath. He knew when Elias needed distraction and when he needed focus. He knew, without ever being told, the weight of the ghosts that Elias carried. They spent 6 years together. 6 years of lying motionless in hostile terrain for days at a time. 6 years of whispered observations and millimeter adjustments. 6 years of trusting each other with their lives in places where a single mistake meant neither of them would ever go home. By 1993, they had a reputation. Mission commanders requested them by name. Intelligence officers briefed them on operations that would never appear in any official record. And in certain circles, in rooms where decisions were made that shaped the fate of nations, they were known by a single designation: Phantom Hawk. The name was not chosen. It was earned. Elias moved through hostile territory like smoke, appearing and disappearing without trace, and Tomas was the eyes that guided him. Together, they were something more than the sum of their parts. Together, they were legendary. And then came Mogadishu. The radiator and courtroom 4B clanked loudly, and Elias blinked. The memory receded like a tide pulling back from shore, leaving him standing once again in the defendant's box with Judge Harrington's impatient gaze boring into him. The bailiff, Whitmore, had moved closer to the bench, and there was something in his expression that suggested recognition struggling to surface. Elias touched the dog tags beneath his shirt. 2 sets. His own, worn smooth by decades against his skin, and Tomas's, still carrying traces of rust in the grooves where blood had dried 31 years ago and never fully been cleaned away. "I asked you a question," the judge repeated, his voice sharp with irritation. "Are those tags genuine or not?" Elias looked at him. The answer was simple. The weight behind it was not. "They are genuine, Your Honor," he said quietly. "Both sets." Harrington's eyebrows rose. "Both sets?" He made a show of leaning forward, as if examining a curiosity. "And why would a homeless man be carrying 2 sets of military dog tags?" The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of Tomas's laughter echoing across a rooftop in Somalia, full of Celeste's hand in his on their wedding day, full of 31 years of service and sacrifice and loss that this man in his black robes could never begin to comprehend. "Because the man who wore the second set," Elias said, "died in my arms." The words hung in the air like smoke after a shot. And somewhere deep in Bailiff Whitmore's memory, a connection finally clicked into place. Judge Harrington let out a sound that was half laugh and half snort, the kind of noise a man makes when he believes he has caught someone in an obvious lie. He turned to face the gallery, spreading his hands in a gesture of theatrical incredulity. "Did everyone hear that? He died in my arms." The judge shook his head slowly, his jowls trembling with exaggerated disbelief. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is precisely what I was talking about. Every vagrant who passes through this courtroom has a story. Every single one of them is a hero, a victim, a misunderstood soul who deserves our sympathy rather than our judgment." He swiveled back toward the defendant's box, his eyes glittering with the particular satisfaction of a predator who believes his prey is cornered. "Let me guess," Harrington continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your friend died, saving your life, in some foreign country, during some classified operation that conveniently cannot be verified. And now you carry his tags as a memorial, wandering the streets of Baltimore like a tragic figure from a war movie, expecting the rest of us to believe your performance." Elias said nothing. His face remained impassive, but something shifted behind his eyes. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like the first tremor before an earthquake. The bailiff, Whitmore, noticed it. The public defender noticed it. Even the stenographer, whose fingers had slowed over a keyboard, noticed it. But Judge Harrington, drunk on his own authority, saw nothing but an old man who had failed to respond to his provocation. The gallery had grown still. The nervous laughter that had followed the judge's earlier mockery was gone now, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. A woman in the third row, a freelance journalist named Patricia Delgado, who had been recording routine docket proceedings for a local news blog, quietly adjusted her phone to ensure it was capturing everything. Something in her gut told her this was no longer routine. Harrington picked up a pen and tapped it against the bench, a rhythmic sound that echoed through the courtroom like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. "Here is what I think happened," the judge said, his voice taking on the cadence of a man delivering a closing argument he had already won. "I think you bought those tags at a pawn shop or a flea market. I think you constructed this elaborate story because you learned long ago that claiming military service opens doors and loosens wallets. I think you have been telling this lie for so long that you have started to believe it yourself." He leaned forward, his robes rustling against the leather of his chair. "And I think," he continued, "that if I were to have those tags examined by someone who actually served, they would tell me exactly what I already know. That you are a fraud. That you have never worn a uniform in your life. That the only battle you have ever fought is the battle to find your next drink or your next fix or whatever substance has reduced you to sleeping in abandoned warehouses in the middle of winter." The public defender rose again, her voice stronger this time. "Your Honor, I must object to this characterization. My client has no history of substance abuse. His record shows only minor offenses related to his housing status. And his military service is documented in the pretrial report, which I would ask the court to review before making such accusations." Harrington waved his hand dismissively without looking at her. "Documented," he repeated, loading the word with contempt. "Anyone can document anything these days. Fake records are as easy to obtain as fake tags. I have learned to trust my instincts, counselor, and my instincts tell me that this man is exactly what he appears to be. A vagrant, a trespasser, a drain on the resources of this city and this court. He turned his attention back to Elias. Now, I'm going to give you one more chance to tell me the truth. You can admit that those tags are props, apologize for wasting this court's time, and accept the sentence I am prepared to impose. Or you can continue with this charade, in which case I will add contempt of court to your charges and ensure that you spend considerably more time reflecting on the consequences of dishonesty. The courtroom waited. Elias drew a slow breath. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear, each word measured like a round being chambered. Your Honor, he said, I've been called many things in my life. I've been called soldier and sniper and ghost. I've been called husband and father. I've been called broken and lost and forgotten. But I have never been called a liar, and I will not accept that name now. Harrington's face reddened. His fingers tightened around the pen until his knuckles went white. Is that so? The judge's voice had dropped to a dangerous register. You will not accept it? Let me remind you where you're standing. You are in my courtroom. You are subject to my authority. And when I tell you that you are a liar, you do not get to disagree. He gestured sharply toward the bailiff. Sergeant Whitmore, approach the defendant and bring me those tags. I want to examine them myself. And while you are at it, have him remove that jacket. I want to see what other costume jewelry he might be hiding under there. Whitmore hesitated. His hand moved toward the defendant's box, then stopped. Something was wrong. Something he could not quite identify, but could feel with the certainty of a man who had spent 20 years learning to trust his instincts in dangerous situations. The old man's posture had changed. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who had not been trained to recognize it. His weight had shifted slightly forward. His shoulders had settled into a position that suggested readiness rather than resignation. His breathing had slowed to a rhythm that Whitmore recognized from his own time in uniform, the controlled respiration of a man preparing for action. And his eyes were no longer the tired, vacant eyes of a homeless man standing before judgment. They were the eyes of something else entirely, something that had been sleeping and was now beginning to wake. Whitmore moved toward the defendant's box slowly, his own military training screaming warnings that his conscious mind could not quite interpret. As he drew closer, he noticed details he had missed before. The precise way the old man held his hands. The scars visible on his forearms where the donated shirt's cuffs had ridden up. The faded edge of what looked like a tattoo disappearing beneath his sleeve. Whitmore stopped. His throat went dry. The old man looked at him. And in that look, Whitmore saw something that made his heart stutter in his chest. Recognition. Not the recognition of a stranger meeting a stranger. The recognition of a teacher seeing a student he had long forgotten. Quantico, Whitmore whispered, the word escaping before he could stop it. 1987. The old man's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened, just for a moment, like a cloud passing briefly across the sun. You were in my class, Elias said quietly. Third row, left side. You could not hit a target past 400 meters when you started. Whitmore's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the edge of the defendant's box to steady himself. And by the time you finished, Elias continued. You were putting rounds through the same hole at 600. The bailiff's hand trembled against the wood. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. Phantom Hawk, he breathed. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, sending ripples in every direction. Judge Harrington frowned. What did you just say? Speak up, Sergeant. What are you mumbling about? But Whitmore could not speak. He could only stare at the old man before him. The legend he had spent 3 decades believing was dead, standing in a defendant's box in a Baltimore courtroom, wearing clothes held together with duct tape and hope. The rooftop in Mogadishu offered no shade from the October sun. Elias lay prone on the concrete, his body pressed flat against the surface that had been absorbing heat since dawn and now radiated it back like a furnace. Sweat soaked through his fatigues and pooled beneath his chest. His eye remained fixed to the scope, scanning the streets 400 meters below, where chaos had erupted 3 hours ago and showed no signs of subsiding. Beside him, Tomas Espinoza maintained his own vigil through the spotting scope. His voice was a constant low murmur, feeding Elias information in the shorthand they had developed over 6 years of partnership. 2 tangos moving east on the parallel street, Tomas said. 600 meters. They are carrying RPGs. Wind is coming from the northwest at 8 knots, gusting to 12. Elias made the calculations automatically, adjusting his aim before Tomas had finished speaking. His finger tightened on the trigger. 2 shots. 2 bodies crumpled in the distant street. He was already scanning for the next threat before they hit the ground. The extraction had gone wrong from the beginning. The CIA asset they were supposed to pull out had been compromised, his cover blown by an informant within the warlord's inner circle. By the time the team reached the extraction point, half the city knew they were coming. Black Hawk helicopters had been hit in another sector, drawing some of the enemy's attention, but enough remained focused on their position to make escape seem impossible. Elias and Tomas had taken the high ground 3 hours ago. Since then, Elias had fired 114 rounds. His confirmed count stood at 23. The barrel of his rifle was hot enough to burn skin. "How are you doing on ammunition?" Tomas asked, his voice strained but steady. Elias did not take his eye from the scope. "Enough," he said. "How is the asset?" Below their position, in a partially collapsed building that offered the only cover within a 3-block radius, the extraction team was pinned down with their package. The asset was a thin man in his 50s who had spent 2 years feeding intelligence to the Americans while pretending to be a loyal member of the warlord's financial network. He had saved countless lives with his information. Now his own life hung by a thread. "Still breathing," Tomas reported, "but they cannot move. Every time someone sticks their head out, they take fire from the south. There's a technical with a mounted gun blocking the only exit route." Elias shifted his aim. He found the technical, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun welded to its bed, positioned at an intersection 550 meters to the southeast. 3 men crewed it. 1 on the gun, 1 feeding ammunition, 1 watching for threats. "I see it," Elias said. "It is a long shot," Tomas observed. "Wind is variable at that distance, and you need to take all 3 before they can reposition." Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Call it." Tomas's voice dropped into the precise cadence of a spotter feeding data to his shooter. Range 547 meters. Wind northwest at 9 knots. Humidity 72%. First target is the gunner. He is wearing a red bandana. Second target is the loader, left side of the bed. Third target is the spotter, passenger side of the cab. Elias breathed out slowly. The world contracted to the small circle of his scope. He could hear his own heartbeat, slow and steady, the rhythm of a man who had learned to find stillness in the midst of chaos. 3 shots rang out in rapid succession. The gunner's head snapped back. The loader spun and fell. The spotter tried to run and made it 2 steps before he dropped. Technical neutralized, Tomas confirmed. Extraction team is moving. They watched as the team below broke from cover, the asset between 2 operators, moving fast toward the rally point where vehicles waited. More hostiles emerged from side streets, drawn by the gunfire. Elias worked methodically, clearing a path 1 round at a time. That was when Tomas saw the shooter in the window. It was a building they had cleared twice in their initial sweep, or thought they had cleared. A 4th-floor window, partially obscured by tattered curtains, with a rifle barrel just visible in the shadows. The barrel was aimed directly at Elias's position. Tomas did not have time to call it. He barely had time to move. "Hawk down." The words were still leaving his mouth when he threw himself sideways, his body interposing itself between the window and his partner. The round that was meant for Elias's temple took Tomas in the chest instead, punching through his vest at the seam where the ceramic plates met. Elias's return shot killed the window shooter before the man could fire again. But that did not matter. Nothing mattered except the sound Tomas made as he hit the rooftop, a wet gasp that Elias would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. He was at Tomas's side in an instant, pressing his hands against the wound, trying to stem the blood that pulsed between his fingers with every weakening beat of his friend's heart. "Stay with me," Elias said, his voice cracking for the first time in 6 years. "Tommy, stay with me. Extraction is coming. You hear me? You just have to hold on." Tomas's eyes found his. There was no fear in them, only a strange calm, as if he had made peace with something Elias could not yet understand. "You got this, Hawk." Tomas's voice was a whisper now, barely audible above the distant gunfire. "You always got this." The blood kept coming. Elias pressed harder, willing the wound to close, willing time to stop, willing the universe to undo the last 30 seconds. "Do not do this," he said. "Do not you dare do this. We walk out together. That was the deal. We always walk out together." Tomas smiled. It was the same smile he had worn 1,000 times, in 1,000 different hellholes, when things went sideways and all they had was each other. "Not this time, brother," he said. "But you're going to be okay. You're going to go home. You're going to hold your wife. You're going to meet your kids when they are born. And you're going to live. That is an order." His hand found Elias's wrist and gripped it with surprising strength. "Promise me," Tomas said. "Promise me you will live." Elias could not speak. His throat had closed around something jagged and immovable. But he nodded, and Tomas saw the nod, and his grip relaxed. "Good," he whispered. "That is good. 90 seconds." That was how long it took for the light to leave Tomas Espinosa's eyes. 90 seconds that stretched into eternity, that burned themselves into Elias's memory like a brand pressed into flesh. When the extraction team reached the rooftop 20 minutes later, they found Elias still holding his partner's body. His hands were covered in blood that had long since stopped flowing. His rifle lay beside him, magazine empty. The route to the rally point was clear. 27 confirmed kills lined the streets below. "Mission complete, sir," the team leader said quietly. Elias looked up. His eyes were dry. His face was stone. "He is coming with us," he said. His voice left no room for argument. "We do not leave him here." They carried Tomas Espinosa's body 4 kilometers to the extraction point. Elias refused to let anyone else touch him. The after-action report would note the efficiency of the Overwatch position. It would commend the precision of the shooting and the successful extraction of a high-value intelligence asset. It would recommend Elias for a Silver Star, his second. It would not mention the tears that cut tracks through the dust on his face as he carried his brother home. The word hung in the courtroom air like gun smoke after a shot. Phantom Hawk. 2 syllables that meant nothing to most of the people present, but meant everything to the man who had just spoken them. Judge Harrington's frown deepened. He was not accustomed to being ignored, and the bailiff's strange behavior was testing the limits of his patience. "Sergeant Whitmore," the judge said sharply, "I gave you an instruction. Retrieve those dog tags and bring them to me. And someone explain to me what Phantom Hawk means, because I assume it is not a legitimate military term." Whitmore did not move. His hand still gripped the edge of the defendant's box, his knuckles white against the dark wood. His eyes remained fixed on the old man before him, seeing not the homeless defendant in donated clothes, but the legend who had taught him to shoot 3 decades ago. "Your Honor," Whitmore said, his voice unsteady, "I need a moment." "You need a moment?" Harrington's voice rose with incredulity. "This is a court of law, Sergeant, not a meditation retreat. You will follow my instructions, or you will explain to me why you are incapable of performing your duties." The public defender had risen again, sensing something shifting in the room's dynamics. She looked from the bailiff to her client and back again, trying to piece together what was happening. In the gallery, Patricia Delgado held her phone steady, capturing everything. Her journalist's instincts told her she was witnessing something significant, though she could not yet understand what. Elias spoke quietly. "Let him be, Your Honor. He is simply processing information that he did not expect to encounter today." Harrington slammed his palm against the bench. The sound cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot. "I have had enough of this," the judge declared. "I do not know what game you two are playing, but it ends now. Sergeant Whitmore, you are relieved of your duties for the remainder of this proceeding." Deputy Martinez approached the defendant and retrieved those tags. A younger bailiff near the back of the courtroom stepped forward uncertainly, glancing at Whitmore as he passed. Whitmore did not acknowledge him. He was lost in memory, transported back to a rifle range at Quantico, where a quiet instructor with eyes like deep water had transformed him from a liability into a marksman. Deputy Martinez reached the defendant's box and extended his hand. "The tag, sir," he said, his voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who wanted no part of whatever was unfolding. Elias looked at him. The young deputy was perhaps 30, with the build of someone who spent time in the gym and the bearing of someone who had never seen combat. His hand was steady enough, but his eyes betrayed confusion. Slowly, with the same deliberate care he had shown before, Elias lifted the chain from around his neck. The two sets of dog tags clinked softly against each other as he placed them in the deputy's waiting palm. Martinez carried them to the bench and set them before the judge. Harrington snatched them up immediately, examining them with the theatrical scrutiny of a man who expected to find evidence of fraud. The tags were worn smooth by decades of contact with skin. The edges were rounded, the text partially obscured by years of wear. On one set, the name was still legible, Okonkwo, Elias K. Below it, his service number, blood type, religious preference. On the second set, Espinoza, Tomas M. Harrington held the second set up to the light, squinting at the discoloration in the grooves of the stamped letters. "What is this?" he asked, pointing to the dark residue. "It looks like rust. Are these tags so old that they are actually rusting?" Elias's voice was quiet but carried clearly through the silent room. "That is not rust, Your Honor." Harrington looked up. "Then what is it?" Elias met his gaze. His face remained impassive, but something in his eyes had hardened into something cold and unyielding. "That is blood," he said. "Corporal Espinoza's blood. From the day he died. I have cleaned those tags many times, but some things do not wash away. Some things stay with you no matter how hard you try to scrub them out." The judge's fingers twitched. He looked down at the tags in his hand with sudden distaste, as if they had transformed into something venomous. In the gallery, a man in his 60s rose slowly to his feet. He wore a windbreaker with a faded Marine Corps emblem on the breast, and his eyes were fixed on the defendant with an expression of dawning recognition. Harrington noticed the movement. "Sit down," he ordered. "This court is in session." The man did not sit. Instead, he spoke, his voice carrying the graveled texture of someone who had spent decades giving orders and having them obeyed. "Your Honor," he said, "my name is Colonel Franklin Abernathy, United States Marine Corps, retired. I served 32 years, including 2 tours in Somalia in the early 90s. And if that man is who I think he is, you are making a very serious mistake." Harrington's face reddened. "I will not have my courtroom turned into a circus. Sit down, or I will have you removed." Colonel Abernathy remained standing. "With respect, Your Honor," he said, "the only circus I see is a judge mocking a man whose service record would make yours look like a footnote. I was in Mogadishu in '93. I know what happened there, and I know the call sign Phantom Hawk." He turned to look at the defendant, and his voice softened with something that sounded almost like reverence. "There were stories," he continued, "about a sniper who held a rooftop for 14 hours while an extraction team was pinned down. About a man who made shots that should have been impossible, who cleared a path through hostile territory 1 round at a time, who carried his dead spotter 4 kilometers to the extraction point because he refused to leave him behind." The colonel's eyes glistened. "They told us he was a ghost," he said, "that he could appear anywhere and disappear just as fast, that he had the patience of a saint and the precision of a machine. They said his name in briefings like it was a prayer." Harrington's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in 34 years, he could not think of anything to say. "I never met him," Colonel Abernathy continued. "He operated in circles far above my clearance. But I knew men who trained under him, who served with him, who said he was the finest operator they had ever seen." He looked directly at Elias, and something passed between them. Recognition, respect, the silent acknowledgement of men who have walked the same dark paths. "Phantom Hawk," the colonel said quietly, "I heard you died years ago. Some said you disappeared after your wife passed. Some said you just faded away." Elias was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I did fade away," he said. "I have been fading for 4 years. But I am still here." The colonel nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. You are. Judge Harrington looked from the colonel to the bailiff to the defendant. His hand still held the dog tags, the blood of a dead man staining his fingers. For the first time, something that might have been doubt flickered across his face. But doubt was not yet belief. And Harrington had built his career on never admitting he was wrong. This proves nothing, he said, though his voice had lost some of its conviction. Anyone could claim to be this Phantom Hawk person. Anyone could invent a story about carrying a dead man through a war zone. He set the tags down on the bench with exaggerated care. I want proof, he declared. Real proof. Not stories from strangers in my gallery. Elias looked at him, and for the first time, something that might have been pity crossed his weathered face. You want proof, Your Honor? He asked softly. Very well. I will give you proof. He began to roll up his sleeve. The fabric of the donated shirt was stiff with age and grime, but it rolled back easily enough. Elias worked slowly, deliberately, as if performing a ritual that demanded reverence. The courtroom had gone so quiet that the hum of the flickering fluorescent lights sounded like thunder. His right forearm emerged first. The skin was weathered, mapped with the geography of 7 decades, but what drew every eye was the ink beneath. The tattoo began just above his wrist. Coordinates, rendered in precise military notation. 2.0469 degrees north, 45.3182 degrees east. Below them, a date, October 3rd, 1993. The numbers were faded but still legible, permanently etched into skin that had seen sun and sand and blood. Above the coordinates, a memorial wreath encircled 3 letters. Tiami Tomas Miguel Espinoza. The ink here was darker, the lines cleaner, as if this portion had been added later or touched up over the years. And rising above it all, spreading across the forearm toward the elbow, a hawk in flight. Its wings were spread wide, and clutched in its talons was a spectral figure, translucent and ghost-like, being carried upward through stylized clouds. The symbolism was unmistakable. A phantom, a hawk, a brother being carried home. But it was the words beneath the hawk that made Deputy Martinez take an involuntary step backward. 2 names, written in a different hand, clearly added at a different time than the rest of the tattoo. Amara, Zola, and below them, a year, 1995. Judge Harrington stared at the forearm. His mouth worked silently for a moment before he found his voice. Were those names? He asked, and for the first time his tone held something other than contempt. Confusion, perhaps, or the first tremors of something he did not want to acknowledge. Elias looked down at the tattoo. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the walls of the courtroom. My daughters, he said, twin girls, born 3 months after I came home from Mogadishu. I had their names added to the tattoo because I wanted to carry them with me the same way I carry Tomas, the same way I carry everyone I have ever loved. He continued rolling the sleeve, revealing more ink. The Force Recon insignia, the eagle and anchor that marked him as one of the elite. More coordinates, more dates, locations that meant nothing to civilians but would have required clearances far above anything Judge Harrington had ever possessed. And scars. The tattoos were interrupted by scar tissue, raised and puckered lines that told stories of their own. A long furrow along his outer forearm where a bullet had grazed instead of penetrated. A starburst pattern near his elbow where shrapnel had torn through muscle and been removed by a field surgeon working by flashlight. The left sleeve came up next. More coordinates, more dates, a small rendering of an American flag, tattered at the edges, and a scar that ran from wrist to elbow, surgical and precise, where doctors had repaired damage that would have ended lesser men. Whitmore had moved closer without realizing it. His eyes traced the tattoos with the recognition of a man who understood their language. Yemen, he said quietly, pointing to one set of coordinates. That was Ophir, was it not? The compound extraction. Elias nodded. Whitmore pointed to another. And these coordinates. I did not recognize them. Elias met his eyes. You would not, he said. That operation does not exist. It never happened. The men who died there are not listed on any memorial. Their families were told training accidents, equipment failures, anything but the truth. The courtroom was frozen. Patricia Delgado's phone captured everything, her hands trembling slightly as she realized the magnitude of what she was recording. In the gallery, Colonel Abernathy had sat down heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. Other spectators who had been waiting for their own cases stared at the defendant with expressions ranging from confusion to awe. The stenographer had stopped typing entirely. Her hands hovered over her keyboard, paralyzed by the weight of what she was witnessing. Judge Harrington looked from the tattoos to the dog tags still resting on his bench to the faces of the people in his courtroom. For 34 years, he had presided over this room with absolute authority. He had judged thousands of defendants, dismissed countless claims, built a reputation on his ability to see through deception. And now he was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. But pride is a stubborn thing, and Judge Wendell Harrington III had never admitted error in his professional life. Tattoos can be faked, he said, though his voice had lost its thunder. Anyone with money and a decent artist could create something like this. It proves nothing about actual service. Colonel Abernathy rose again, his face flushed with anger. Your Honor, with all due respect, you are embarrassing yourself. Those coordinates are not random numbers. They are specific locations where specific operations occurred. No one outside the special operations community would even know those places existed, let alone have the dates memorized. I did not ask for your input, Colonel Harrington snapped. Sit down, or I will have you removed. Abernathy did not move. You can remove me if you want, he said, but you cannot remove the truth. That man served this country in ways you cannot imagine. He did things that kept people like you safe while you sat in your comfortable courtroom passing judgment on people whose shoes you are not worthy to shine. The judge's gavel came down with a crack that made half the gallery jump. Order, Harrington shouted. I will have order in this court. But order was slipping away from him. He could feel it in the way the room's attention had shifted, the way people were looking at the defendant instead of at him, the way the power dynamics that had defined his courtroom for 3 decades were inverting before his eyes. He needed to regain control. He needed to prove that he was still the authority in this room. His eyes fell on the defendant's jacket, discarded on the edge of the defendant's box. Deputy Martinez, he said, his voice tight with desperation, search that jacket. Search it thoroughly. If this man is who he claims to be, surely he must be carrying some form of documentation. And if he is not, we will know he is exactly what I said he was. Martinez hesitated, looking at the old man for permission. Elias nodded slowly. Go ahead, he said. There is nothing in there I am ashamed of. The deputy picked up the worn jacket and began going through the pockets. His hands emerged with a small collection of items that he carried to the bench and laid out before the judge. A photograph, creased and faded, showing 2 young girls in matching dresses. A woman stood behind them, her hands on their shoulders, her smile radiant. The photograph had been laminated at some point, protecting it from the elements, though the lamination itself was now yellowed and cracked. A small book, battered and dog-eared. The cover identified it as a guide to astronomy, the kind of thing a parent might use to teach children about the stars. A wedding ring, gold, worn thin by decades of wear. It hung on a simple chain, clearly meant to be worn around the neck alongside the dog tags. And a folded piece of paper, soft with age, that had clearly been opened and refolded hundreds of times. Harrington reached for the paper. He unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the handwritten words. The color drained from his face. What is it? Deputy Martinez asked. Harrington did not answer. He simply stared at the letter in his hands, his lips moving slightly as he read. The courtroom waited. The letter had been written on lined notebook paper, the kind that could be found in any convenience store or military PX. The handwriting was neat but hurried, the words of someone who had limited time and unlimited things to say. Harrington read it silently, his lips forming the words without sound. The courtroom watched him, waiting for some indication of what the paper contained. But the judge's face had become unreadable, his earlier bluster replaced by something that looked almost like shock. "Your Honor," the public defender said cautiously, "may we know what is in that letter?" Harrington did not respond. He simply stared at the paper, as if it had transformed into something he could not comprehend. It was Elias who finally spoke. "That letter was written by Corporal Tomas Espinoza," he said. "He wrote it 3 days before the Mogadishu operation, as he did before every deployment. Soldiers write letters like that when they're going somewhere they might not come back from. They give them to someone they trust to deliver if the worst happens." He paused, his eyes distant. Tomas gave his letter to his sister Maria. He continued. She was supposed to send it to his mother if he did not make it home. "But after the funeral, after I carried him 4 kilometers through hostile territory and watched them put him in the ground at Arlington, Maria came to me. She said Tomas had written something else. Something he had asked her to give to me if he died, and I survived." The courtroom was silent. Even the radiators seemed to have stopped their clanking. "That letter has been in my pocket for 31 years, Elias said. "I have read it so many times that the paper is falling apart. I have memorized every word. But I still carry it because sometimes memory is not enough. Sometimes you need to hold the thing itself." Harrington looked up from the letter. His eyes met Elias's, and something passed between them. The judge's expression had changed. The contempt was gone, replaced by something more complicated. Confusion, disbelief, and beneath it all, the first stirrings of shame. "Read it," Colonel Abernathy said from the gallery. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of command. "If it will settle this matter, read it aloud." Harrington hesitated. His hands trembled slightly as he held the fragile paper. "Go ahead, Your Honor," Elias said. Tomas would not mind. He always said the truth should never be hidden. The judge cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice had lost all its theatrical power. It was simply the voice of a man reading words that had been written by another man who had known he might die. "Hawk," Harrington began, "if you're reading this, it means I did not make it back. Do not blame yourself. I know you, brother. I know you're already running through every moment, every decision, looking for the thing you could have done differently. Stop it. Whatever happened, it was not your fault. War does not care about fault." The judge paused. His throat worked as he swallowed. "We have been together for 6 years," he continued reading. 6 years of lying in the dirt, eating sand, and watching each other's backs. You are the best operator I have ever seen. You are also the best friend I have ever had. I never told you that because we do not say things like that. But if I'm gone, I want you to know." Patricia Delgado's phone captured the tears that were now running freely down Deputy Martinez's face. In the gallery, a woman had pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "You have a wife who loves you," Harrington read, his voice cracking. "You are about to have children. That is what you need to focus on now. Not me, not the things we did, not the ghosts we carry. You need to go home, Hawk. You need to hold Celeste and watch your kids grow up and teach them about the stars the way you always talked about. You need to live." The judge stopped reading. His hand shook as he turned the page over. "There's more," he said quietly. Elias nodded. "Finish it." Harrington took a breath and continued. "The last thing I want is for you to spend the rest of your life mourning me. I want you to smile when you think about the good times. I want you to tell your daughters about their crazy Uncle Tomas, who talked too much and could read the wind like nobody else. I want you to be happy, brother. That is all I have ever wanted for you." The judge's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "So here is my final order, Sergeant Okonkwo. Live. Love your family. Find peace. And when you finally meet me again on the other side, I want to hear stories about the incredible life you built after I was gone. Do not let my death be the end of your story. Let it be the beginning of something new. Your brother always, Tomas." Silence filled the courtroom like water filling a vessel. Complete. Absolute. Suffocating. Harrington set the letter down on the bench with exaggerated care, as if it were made of glass. His hand was still shaking. Colonel Abernathy spoke into the silence. "That letter," he said, "is the kind of thing that cannot be faked. That is not the writing of a con man. That is the writing of a soldier saying goodbye to his brother." The judge did not respond. He sat motionless on his bench, staring at the collection of items before him. The photograph of the woman and the twin girls. The astronomy book with its dog-eared pages, the wedding ring on its chain, the letter from a dead man, the bloodstained dog tags, and in the defendant's box, an old man who had been mocked and humiliated, who had been called a fraud and a liar and a drain on society, stood with his sleeves still rolled up, his scars and tattoos exposed for all to see. Elias could have walked away. He could have taken the trespassing charge, served whatever sentence this broken man imposed, and returned to his bridge and his shadows and his daily pilgrimage to Celeste's grave. But Tomas's letter was in a stranger's hands. The words his brother had written were hanging in the air of this courtroom, exposed to the judgment of a man who had spent the last hour treating him like garbage. And Celeste who had held him through the nightmares. Celeste who had raised their daughters while he was gone for months at a time. Celeste who had told him every single day that his service mattered, that the things he did in darkness brought light somewhere in the world. She would not want him to let this stand. She would want him to speak. So he spoke. "You asked me why I am homeless, Your Honor," Elias said. His voice was steady now, gaining strength with each word. "You asked how someone with my record could end up sleeping under bridges and eating from soup kitchens." He looked at the photograph on the bench. The woman's smile. The daughter's matching dresses. "For years ago, my wife died," he said. "Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to death was 11 weeks. I watched her fade away in a hospital bed, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. I could make impossible shots at 600 meters. I could hold a position for 14 hours against impossible odds. But I could not save her." His voice cracked, but he pushed forward. "After she was gone, I could not look at my daughters without seeing her face staring back at me. They have her eyes, her smile. Every time I looked at them, I felt her absence like a bullet wound that would not heal. So I convinced myself that I was protecting them by leaving, that my presence would only cause them pain, that they would be better off without a broken old man who could not stop seeing ghosts." He drew a shaky breath. "I left them a note, told them I loved them, told them to live their lives, told them not to look for me, and then I walked away from everything I had left." The courtroom was frozen. No one moved. No one breathed. "I have been on the streets for 4 years," Elias said. "I have slept under bridges and in abandoned buildings. I have eaten from dumpsters when the soup kitchens were closed. I have carried Tomas's tags and Celeste's ring and that photograph of my daughters. And every night I look at their faces and wonder if they have forgotten me." His eyes met Harrington's. "That is why I am homeless, Your Honor. Not because I am a fraud. Not because I am a liar. Because I broke my promise to my brother. He told me to live. And instead, I have been slowly dying for 4 years." The silence that followed was the loudest thing anyone in that courtroom had ever heard. Judge Harrington sat frozen on his bench, his hands gripping the edge of the polished wood as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. The theatrical confidence that had defined his courtroom presence for 3 decades had evaporated, leaving behind something smaller and more uncertain. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. 20. 30. Finally, Harrington spoke. His voice was barely recognizable, stripped of its practiced authority. "I think," he began, then stopped. He looked down at the items spread before him. The photograph, the letter, the bloodstained dog tags. He looked at the old man, standing in the defendant's box with his sleeves rolled up and his history carved into his skin. "I think we should take a brief recess," the judge said. Colonel Abernathy rose again. "With respect, Your Honor, I do not believe a recess is what this situation requires. What this situation requires is an immediate dismissal of all charges and an apology to a man who has given more to this country than most people can imagine." Harrington's jaw tightened. The colonel's words had struck something in him, some vestige of pride that had not yet been fully extinguished. "I am still the presiding judge in this courtroom," he said, his voice regaining some of its edge. "I will determine what this situation requires." "Then determine it," Abernathy replied. "We are all waiting." The tension between them crackled through the air. 2 men accustomed to authority, facing each other across a divide that could not be bridged by rank or position. It was the public defender who broke the stalemate. She stepped forward, her voice carrying a new confidence that had not been present at the start of the proceedings. "Your Honor," she said, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client. The trespassing charge was filed for seeking shelter in an abandoned building during life-threatening weather conditions. My client is a decorated veteran of the United States Marine Corps with a service record that, as we have heard today, includes classified operations and multiple commendations for valor. He poses no threat to public safety. He has no history of violent offenses. The only crime he has committed is the crime of being homeless. She paused, letting her words settle. Furthermore, she continued, I would suggest that the court's treatment of my client during these proceedings has been inappropriate and potentially actionable. The accusations of fraud, the demands to remove personal items of deep significance, the public humiliation, all of this has been documented and recorded. She glanced toward Patricia Delgado, who was still holding her phone steady, capturing every moment. I trust, the public defender concluded, that the court will make the right decision. Harrington's face had gone pale. He understood what she was implying. The recording, the witnesses, the colonel who could testify to the authenticity of the defendant's service, the bailiff who had trained under him at Quantico, the letter from a dead soldier that could not have been fabricated. His career, which had seemed so unassailable an hour ago, now hung by threads. The judge looked at Elias. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Harrington asked a question that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. Your daughters, he said quietly. Amara and Zola. Where are they now? Elias's expression flickered. It was the first time the judge had addressed him as a human being rather than as a defendant to be processed and dismissed. They are in Baltimore, he said. At Johns Hopkins. They are finishing their residencies. Pediatric medicine. Both of them. Something that might have been wonder crossed the judge's face. Doctors, he said. Your daughters are going to be doctors. Elias nodded. Their mother always wanted them to help people. She will be proud of them. I am proud of them, even though I have no right to be. Have you seen them? Harrington asked. Since you left? Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I watch them, he said. Sometimes, from a distance. When they graduate to a new stage of their training, I find a way to be there. Not close enough to be seen, just close enough to know they are okay. His eyes grew distant. Last year, Amara presented a research paper at a conference downtown. I stood outside the building and watched through the window. She looked so much like her mother. The way she moved her hands when she talked. The way she smiled when someone asked a good question. He drew a shaky breath. Zola got engaged 6 months ago. I saw the announcement in the newspaper. She looked happy in the photograph. The man she is marrying looks kind. I hope he is worthy of her. The courtroom was utterly still. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to have stopped their flickering. They did not know you were watching? The public defender asked gently. Elias shook his head. I told them not to look for me. I did not want them to waste their lives searching for a broken old man. I thought if I stayed away, they could move on, build their lives, be happy without the weight of me dragging them down. Harrington leaned forward. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of its earlier cruelty. Do you think that is what they want? He asked. Do you think they want you to stay away? Elias looked at him. For a long moment, he did not answer. Finally, he said, I do not know what they want anymore. I only know that every day I stay away is another day I do not have to see the disappointment in their eyes. Another day, I do not have to explain why I left. Another day, I do not have to face what I did to them. His voice cracked. I was a coward, Your Honor. I could face enemy fire without flinching. I could hold a position for 14 hours with bullets flying past my head. But I could not face my own daughters after their mother died. I could not look them in the eyes and admit that I was broken beyond repair. He looked down at his hands. The same hands that had made impossible shots across 3 continents. The same hands that had held his dying friend. The same hands that had held his dying wife. I told myself I was protecting them, he said, but I was protecting myself from the pain of seeing Celeste in their faces every day, from the guilt of knowing I could not save her, from the fear that they would look at me the way I look at myself. He raised his head and met Harrington's eyes. That is the truth, Your Honor, he said. I'm not a hero. I'm a broken old man who ran away from his children because he was too afraid to stay. If you want to punish me for trespassing, go ahead. Whatever sentence you impose will be nothing compared to the sentence I have already imposed on myself." The judge sat in silence for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Softer, almost human. "I think," he said slowly, "that I have heard enough." He looked at the items on his bench one more time. Then he looked at the old man standing before him. "I'm going to ask you a question," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly. Not as a defendant, not as a veteran, just as a man." Elias nodded. Harrington leaned forward. "If your daughters walked through that door right now," he said, "what would you say to them?" Elias's composure, which had held through everything, finally cracked. His eyes filled with tears that he did not try to hide. "I would tell them I am sorry," he whispered. "I would tell them I love them. I would tell them that leaving was the worst mistake I ever made. And I would beg them to forgive me, even though I do not deserve it." The judge was quiet for a moment. Then he reached for his gavel. "Case dismissed," he said. The gavel came down with a sound that seemed to echo far beyond the walls of courtroom 4B. Case dismissed. 2 words that should have ended the proceedings. 2 words that should have sent the defendant back to his bridge and his shadows and his slow fade into oblivion. But the courtroom did not empty. No one moved to leave. The gallery remained frozen, witnesses to something that had transcended the ordinary business of justice. Judge Harrington set down the gavel and looked at the items still spread across his bench. The photograph, the letter, the astronomy book, the wedding ring, the dog tags with their traces of 31-year-old blood. He gathered them carefully, handling each one as if it were sacred, and held them out toward the defendant's box. "These belong to you," he said quietly. Elias stepped forward slowly. His movements were measured, deliberate, as if he were approaching something that might shatter if handled too roughly. He took the items one by one, returning each to its place. The photograph went into his jacket pocket, over his heart. The letter was refolded with practiced care and slipped beside it. The astronomy book fit into an inner pocket. The wedding ring on its chain went around his neck, settling against his chest alongside the dog tags. The dog tags themselves he held for a moment longer. His thumb traced the letters of Tomas's name, following grooves he had followed 10,000 times before. Then he placed them around his neck, where they had hung for 3 decades. Harrington watched this ritual in silence. When Elias was finished, the judge spoke again. "I owe you an apology," he said. The words seemed to cost him something, emerging slowly like stones being pulled from deep water. "I made assumptions based on your appearance. I treated you with contempt when you deserved respect. I accused you of fraud when you were telling the truth. I mocked your service when I should have honored it." He paused, his jaw working. "I have sat on this bench for 34 years," he continued. "I have seen thousands of defendants. I thought I could read people. I thought I could tell the frauds from the genuine. I was wrong about you, and my wrongness caused you pain in a courtroom that should have treated you with dignity." Elias looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice carried no anger, no bitterness, only a weariness that seemed to reach down to his bones. "I have been judged by worse men in worse places, Your Honor," he said, "and I have learned that judgment says more about the one who judges than the one who is judged. I do not hold this against you. I do not have the energy left to hold anything against anyone." The words hung in the air, a benediction and an indictment wrapped together. Colonel Abernathy approached the front of the courtroom. He stopped beside the defendant's box and extended his hand. "Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo," he said formally, "it is an honor to meet you. I wish it had been under better circumstances." Elias took the offer hand. His grip was firm despite his years, the grip of a man who had once been capable of holding a rifle steady for hours without trembling. "Just Elias now," he said. "I have not been gunnery sergeant in a long time." The colonel shook his head. "Some ranks are permanent," he said. "Some titles are earned in blood and cannot be taken away. You will always be gunnery sergeant to those who know what you did." The bailiff, Whitmore, had moved closer as well. He stood at attention, his posture rigid, his eyes glistening. "Sir," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never got to thank you properly. What you taught me at Quantico saved my life more times than I can count. The patience, the stillness, the way you showed us how to see what others miss. He swallowed hard. I made it through 2 tours because of what you taught me, he continued. I came home to my wife and my kids because of skills I learned in your class. And I have spent 30 years not knowing if you were alive or dead, never having the chance to tell you that. Elias looked at him. Something softened in his weathered face. You were a good student, he said quietly. One of the best. I'm glad you made it home. I'm glad you have a wife and children. That is what matters, not the things we did overseas. The lives we built when we came back. The public defender approached, gathering her files. Her eyes were red, though she tried to hide it behind professional composure. Mr. Okonkwo, she said, I want you to know that I have contacts with several veterans organizations in the city. Housing assistance, medical care, support services. If you're willing, I can put you in touch with people who can help. Elias looked at her with an expression that was difficult to read. Gratitude mixed with something else. Reluctance, perhaps, or fear. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully. I will think about it. The journalist, Patricia Delgado, lowered her phone at last. She had been recording for nearly an hour, capturing every word, every revelation, every moment of this extraordinary proceeding. She knew she was holding something significant, something that would spread far beyond this courtroom once she uploaded it. She approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude, but unable to stay silent. Sir, she said, I am a journalist. I have been recording this proceeding for a local news site. What I have captured here, your story, it is going to reach a lot of people. I want you to know that before I publish anything. Elias considered her for a moment. What is your name? He asked. Patricia Delgado, she replied. Miss Delgado, Elias said slowly, I have spent 4 years trying to disappear, trying to fade away where no one would find me. I did not want to be seen. I did not want to be known. I wanted to be forgotten. He paused, his eyes distant. But maybe that was wrong, he continued. Maybe Tomas was right. Maybe hiding is not the same as living. Maybe disappearing is just another way of dying. He looked at her directly. If you publish this story, he said, my daughters might see it. They might learn where I am. They might come looking for me. Patricia nodded. Is that what you want? Elias was silent for a long time. The courtroom waited. Finally, he spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the room. I do not know what I want, he said. I only know that I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of watching from a distance. I'm tired of carrying this weight alone. He drew a shaky breath. Publish your story, Miss Delgado, he said. Let the world see what happened here. And if my daughters find me, then maybe it is time for that conversation I have been running from for 4 years. Patricia nodded slowly. She understood the magnitude of what she had been entrusted with. A man's story, a father's confession, a soldier's redemption. I will be respectful, she promised. I will tell the truth. Elias nodded. That is all anyone can ask. He turned toward the door of the courtroom. For a moment, he paused, looking back at the bench where Judge Harrington still sat, at the bailiff who had trained under him, at the colonel who had heard legends of his exploits, at the journalist who would carry his story to the world. Then he walked toward the door, his shoulders straight despite the weight they carried, his footsteps steady on the marble floor. He did not know what awaited him outside. He did not know if his daughters would see the story. He did not know if they would want to find him after 4 years of silence. But for the first time in a long time, he was not running. He was simply walking forward into whatever came next. The courtroom doors swung open, and Elias Okonkwo stepped out into the gray February light. The video went online at 4:47 that afternoon. Patricia Delgado uploaded it to her news site with a simple headline. Homeless veteran humiliated in court revealed as legendary special operations soldier. She included no commentary, no editorial framing, just the raw footage, 53 minutes of truth that spoke for itself. By 6 o'clock, it had 6,000 shares. By 9 o'clock, it had crossed 400,000 views. By midnight, it was trending nationally. The hashtag #JusticeForPhantomHawk appeared on social media platforms, spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Veterans organizations issued statements. Politicians released carefully worded expressions of outrage. News networks picked up the story, running segments with titles like The Legend in the Defendant's Box and The Judge Who Mocked a Hero. Judge Wendell Harrington III released a statement through his office at 10:30 that evening, expressing regret for any misunderstanding and emphasizing his long record of public service. By morning, calls for his resignation had begun. By noon, the State Judicial Review Board had announced an investigation into his conduct. None of this reached Elias immediately. He had returned to his place beneath the overpass on the outskirts of the city, the hidden alcove he had chosen for its tactical advantages. Cover from the elements, clear sight lines in 3 directions, proximity to a soup kitchen that served breakfast at 7 o'clock and dinner at 5:30. He spread his military-issue sleeping bag on the concrete, folded his worn jacket beneath his head, and tried to sleep. But sleep would not come. The events of the day replayed behind his closed eyes. The judge's contempt. Whitmore's recognition. The letter read aloud. His own confession laid bare before strangers. He had told the journalist to publish the story. He had said he was tired of hiding. But now, in the darkness beneath the overpass, the weight of that decision pressed down on him like a physical force. What if his daughters saw the video? What if they came looking for him? What would he say to them? How could he explain 4 years of silence, for years of watching from the shadows, for years of letting them believe he had abandoned them? He reached into his jacket and withdrew the photograph. The lamination was cracked, the image faded, but he could still see their faces. Celeste, radiant and alive, her hands on the shoulders of 2 little girls in matching dresses. Amara on the left, serious even at 8 years old, with her mother's thoughtful eyes. Zola on the right, grinning broadly, always the one who found joy in everything. They would be 29 now. Doctors, healers, everything their mother had dreamed for them. "I am sorry," Elias whispered to the photograph. "I'm so sorry." The night passed slowly. Traffic hummed on the highway above. Distant sirens wailed and faded. Somewhere in the city, his story was spreading like wildfire, reaching eyes and ears he would never know. Morning came gray and cold, the sun hidden behind thick clouds that promised more freezing rain. Elias rose at 5:30, as he did every morning, folded his sleeping bag with military precision, and began his daily ritual. First, the public restroom at the park 3 blocks east, where the lock had been broken for 2 years, and no one cared enough to fix it. He washed his face and hands, ran wet fingers through his gray hair, made himself as presentable as donated clothes and street living allowed. Then, the walk to Celeste's grave. She was buried in a small cemetery on the edge of the city, in a plot they had purchased together 30 years ago, when such things seemed impossibly distant. Every morning, rain or shine, freezing cold or summer heat, Elias made the 4-meal walk to stand before her headstone. The marble was simple. Celeste Adora Alconquo, beloved wife and mother. 19582020. The dates bracketed a life of extraordinary love and ordinary moments, of raising children and waiting for a husband who was always deploying somewhere dangerous, of building a home that had survived everything except her absence. Elias stood before the stone, his breath misting in the February air. "I did something yesterday," he said quietly. "I told the truth. In a courtroom, in front of strangers. I let them see who I was, who I am." He paused, gathering his thoughts. A journalist recorded it. She's going to share it with the world. And I think maybe our daughters will see it. Maybe they will come looking for me. His voice cracked. "I do not know if I am ready for that, Celeste. I do not know if I can face them. But I'm tired of running. You always told me I was braver than I believed. Maybe it is time to find out if you were right." He stood in silence for a long moment, letting the cold seep into his bones, letting the weight of the morning settle around him. "I miss you," he said finally. "Every day, every hour. You were the best part of me, and when you left, I did not know how to be a person anymore. I'm still not sure I do, but I am trying. I promised Tomas I would live. Maybe it is time I started keeping that promise." He touched the headstone, his fingers tracing the letters of her name. "I love you, Celeste. I always will. Then he turned and began the long walk back toward the city. He did not know that at that exact moment, in an apartment 6 miles away, two young women were staring at a phone screen with tears streaming down their faces. He did not know that the video had reached them through a colleague who recognized the last name, who asked if they were related to the veteran in the footage. He did not know that Amara had watched the entire 53 minutes without blinking, her hand pressed to her mouth, while Zola sobbed beside her. He did not know that they were already pulling on their coats, grabbing their keys, running for the door. He did not know that after 4 years of searching, for years of wondering, for years of refusing to believe their father was gone forever, they had finally found him. All he knew was that the sun was trying to break through the clouds, and that his feet were carrying him forward, one step at a time, into a future he could not predict. He was halfway back to his alcove when his instincts, honed by decades of training, told him he was being watched. He slowed his pace, scanning the street with eyes that still saw everything despite their age. A car parked 50 meters ahead, two figures standing beside it. Female, young, watching him with an intensity that made his heart stutter. He stopped walking. The figures did not move, and then one of them spoke, a single word that cut through the February air like a blade. Dad? The voice was Amara's. He would have known it anywhere, despite the years, despite the distance, despite everything. Elias Okonkwo stood frozen on a Baltimore sidewalk, looking at the daughters he had abandoned, and for the first time in 4 years, he had no idea what to do next. The distance between them was perhaps 30 meters. It might as well have been an ocean. Elias stood rooted to the sidewalk, his body refusing the commands his mind tried to send. Run, part of him screamed. Disappear. Fade into the alleys and shadows you know so well. Spare them the sight of what you have become. But his legs would not move. His feet had become anchors, fixed to the cracked concrete as if welded there by forces beyond his control. Amara took the first step, then another. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if she were approaching a wounded animal that might bolt at any sudden motion. Behind her, Zola followed, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. They were beautiful. That was the first coherent thought that broke through the static in Elias's mind. They were beautiful, and they looked so much like their mother that it made his chest ache with a pain no battlefield wound had ever matched. Amara stopped 3 meters away. Her eyes, Celeste's eyes, searched his face, taking in the gray beard, the weathered skin, the gauntness that 4 years of street living had carved into his features, taking in the man he had become. We have been looking for you, she said. Her voice was steady, but only just. For years, Dad. For years of searching, hiring investigators, checking shelters, morgues. Her voice cracked on the last word. Every time a body turned up unidentified, she continued, we had to go look. We had to make sure it was not you. Do you have any idea what that was like? Not knowing if you were alive or dead. Elias opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His throat had closed around something sharp and immovable. Zola pushed past her sister. Unlike Amara's controlled approach, Zola moved with the urgency of someone who had been holding back for too long. She closed the remaining distance in 3 quick strides and threw her arms around her father with a force that nearly knocked him backward. Dad, she sobbed into his chest. Dad, Dad, Dad. The word was a prayer and an accusation and a benediction all at once. Elias stood rigid for a moment, his arms hanging at his sides, his body having forgotten how to receive embrace. Then, slowly, trembling, his arms rose and wrapped around his daughter. The first loving touch he had felt in 4 years. Something broke inside him. The wall he had built, the fortress of isolation and self-punishment, crumbled like sand before a wave. A sound escaped his throat, something between a gasp and a sob, and suddenly he was crying. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire frame. I am sorry, he managed to whisper. I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. Amara watched for a moment, her jaw tight, her eyes glistening. Then she too stepped forward, wrapping her arms around both of them, and the 3 of them stood on a Baltimore sidewalk, holding each other as if the world might end if they let go. Pedestrians walked around them, some curious, some uncomfortable, most too absorbed in their own lives to pay attention to the reunion unfolding in their midst. Cars passed. The city continued its endless motion. But for Elias and his daughters, time had stopped. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they separated. Zola kept her hand on her father's arm, as if afraid he might vanish if she released him. "You watched my engagement announcement," she said. "In the video, you said you saw it in the newspaper." Elias nodded, not trusting his voice. "You knew where we were," Amara said. Her voice carried an edge now, the anger that had been hiding beneath the relief. "You knew we were at Hopkins. You watched us from a distance. You could have come to us at any time." Elias forced himself to meet her eyes. "I thought," he began, then stopped. He took a breath and tried again. "I thought you were better off without me. I thought my presence would only remind you of your mother, of losing her. I thought if I stayed away, you could move on, build your lives, be happy." Amara shook her head, and a bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Happy? You thought we could be happy, not knowing if our father was alive or dead. You thought we could just move on while we were checking morgues and homeless shelters and missing persons reports?" She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "Do you know what it was like," she demanded, "graduating from medical school without you there? Walking across that stage knowing that somewhere out there, my father might be dying in an alley while I accepted a diploma?" Her voice broke. "Do you know what it was like planning a wedding?" Zola added, her voice thick with tears, "and not being able to invite my own father? Having to explain to Marcus why there would be an empty chair where you should be sitting?" Elias flinched as if struck. Each word landed like a blow, and he accepted them all because he deserved them. "I know," he said quietly. "I know. There is nothing I can say that will undo what I did. No apology that will be enough. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself. From the pain of seeing your mother in your faces. From the guilt of surviving when she did not. From the fear that you would look at me and see a broken man who could not save the woman he loved." He drew a shaky breath. "I was a coward," he continued. "I could face anything except my own grief. So I ran. And I kept running because every day I stayed away made it harder to come back. I told myself you were better off. But I was lying. To you and to myself." He looked at both of them, his daughters, his children, the living legacy of the love he had shared with Celeste. "I do not expect your forgiveness," he said. "I do not deserve it. But I need you to know that not a single day passed when I did not think of you. Why I did not look at your photograph and wonder what you were doing. Why I did not whisper your names before I tried to sleep." His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're my daughters. You're the best thing I ever did. And leaving you was the worst mistake of my life." Silence fell between them. The February wind cut through the street, carrying the smell of approaching rain. Traffic hummed in the distance. Then Zola spoke. Her voice was soft, but carried a strength that reminded Elias of Celeste. "We did not come here for an apology," she said. Elias blinked. "What?" Amara stepped forward again. Her eyes were still wet, but the anger had faded, replaced by something more complicated, something that looked almost like hope. "We came here for our father," she said. "We do not want explanations. We do not need you to justify what you did. We just want you back." She reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm and warm and alive. "Come home, Dad," she said. "Please, just come home." Elias looked at his daughters, at the women they had become, at the strength and grace they had inherited from their mother, at the love that somehow, impossibly, had survived 4 years of his absence. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something stir in his chest that might have been hope. "Home," he repeated as if testing a word from a foreign language. Zola squeezed his arm. "We have a spare room," she said. "It is not much, but it is warm. It has a bed, and it is yours for as long as you need it." Elias looked at her, at both of them. "I do not," he began, then stopped. He had been about to say he did not deserve this, did not deserve their kindness, their forgiveness, their love. But the words died on his tongue, because maybe Tomas had been right. Maybe punishing himself was not the same as honoring the dead. Maybe accepting love was not weakness. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running and start living. "Okay," he whispered, Amara's face transformed. Relief and joy and something like disbelief all merged into an expression that made her look, for just a moment, exactly like her mother. "Okay," she repeated. Elias nodded. His voice was stronger now. "Okay, I will come home." Zola let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled him into another embrace. Amara joined them, and once again the three of them stood together on that Baltimore sidewalk, holding on to each other as if they would never let go. And this time, Elias held on too. 6 months later, the world looked different through Elias Okonkwo's eyes. The spare room in his daughter's apartment had become his room. The walls held photographs now, images spanning decades. His wedding day, the twins as infants, graduations and birthdays and ordinary moments that had once seemed unremarkable and now felt like treasures beyond price. On the nightstand sat the astronomy book, its pages still dog-eared, its spine still cracked, but no longer hidden in a jacket pocket. It rested in the open, waiting to be read. The first weeks had been difficult. His body, accustomed to concrete and cold, had forgotten how to accept comfort. He would wake in the middle of the night, disoriented by the softness of the mattress, and find himself on the floor before he fully regained consciousness. He would flinch at unexpected touches, startle at sudden sounds, retreat into silences that lasted hours. But Amara and Zola were patient. They did not push. They did not demand explanations or progress reports. They simply made space for him, included him in their lives, and waited for him to find his way back to being human. Therapy helped. The VA counselor, a woman named Dr. Rosario, who had spent 20 years working with combat veterans, understood his silences in ways that required no translation. She did not ask him to talk about Mogadishu or the operations that did not exist. She simply sat with him week after week, creating a space where healing could happen at its own pace. The weight began to lift, slowly, incrementally, like fog burning off in morning sun. His body recovered faster than his mind. Regular meals and warm shelter filled out the gauntness that 4 years of street living had carved into him. His shoulders straightened. His step grew steadier. The tremor in his hands, which he had attributed to age, but which Dr. Rosario recognized as chronic stress response, gradually faded. He attended Zola's wedding in April. The ceremony was small, held in a garden where cherry blossoms drifted like pink snow, and Elias walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming down his face. Marcus, the groom, shook his hand afterward and said simply, "She never stopped believing you would come back." "Neither did I. Welcome to the family." Amara completed her residency in May, graduating at the top of her class. Elias sat in the front row, visible to everyone, no longer watching from shadows or through distant windows. When her name was called, he stood and applauded until his palms ached, and she caught his eye from the stage and smiled. The video from the courtroom had reached over 12 million views. Patricia Delgado's simple headline had evolved into a phenomenon, spawning articles and interviews and documentary proposals. Elias declined most of them. His story, he said, was not for entertainment, but he agreed to speak with veterans organizations, to share his experience with others who were struggling. That was how he found Captain Evelyn Okafor. She ran a reintegration program for combat veterans, operating out of a converted warehouse on the edge of the city. No bureaucracy, no paperwork, just presence and understanding and a community of people who had seen the same darkness and were trying to find their way back to light. The first time Elias walked through her doors, she met him with a handshake and a simple statement. "I know who you are. More importantly, I know where you have been. Not geographically, spiritually. Welcome." He started attending weekly meetings. He sat in the back at first, listening more than speaking, absorbing the stories of men and women who had carried weights similar to his own. Iraq, Afghanistan, places that existed and places that did not. Losses that could be spoken and losses that would never find words. One evening, 3 months after his first visit, he spoke. "My name is Elias," he said. "Call sign was Phantom Hawk, and I lost my brother because I missed a shot by half a second." The room went still. Faces turned toward him, not with judgment, but with recognition. I spent 31 years carrying that guilt, he continued. And when my wife died, I broke. I left my daughters because I could not face my own grief. I lived on the streets for 4 years, punishing myself, waiting to die. He paused, his eyes moving across the faces before him. But I'm still here, he said. I'm still trying. And if I can come back from where I was, so can you. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of understanding, of shared burden, of the quiet acknowledgement that none of them were alone. After the meeting, a young woman approached him. She wore a Marine Corps sweatshirt and carried herself with the bearing of someone who had recently separated from service. Her eyes held the same haunted quality that Elias had seen in his own mirror for years. I lost my best friend in Helmand, she said quietly. I.e.D. I was driving. She was in the passenger seat. I walked away without a scratch. Elias nodded. He understood without her having to explain further. It was not your fault, he said. She shook her head. Everyone says that. I know, Elias replied. And one day, you might believe it. But until then, you keep showing up. You keep talking. You keep trying. That is all any of us can do. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Thank you, she said. Elias watched her walk away. He thought of Tomas, of the letter that still lived in his pocket, of the promise he had made and broken and was finally trying to keep. Still here, brother, he whispered. Still trying. The evening sun slanted through the warehouse windows, painting everything in shades of gold. Elias stood in that light, no longer a ghost, no longer fading, finally beginning to live. That night, he returned to his daughter's apartment. Zola was cooking dinner, something fragrant with spices that reminded him of meals Celeste used to make. Amara sat at the kitchen table, reviewing patient files, her brow furrowed in concentration. Elias settled into his chair by the window, the astronomy book open in his lap. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Dad, Zola called from the kitchen. Can you help me remember which constellation Mom always said looked like a dancer? Elias smiled. It was the first genuine smile that had crossed his face in longer than he could remember. Orion, he said. She always said Orion looked like he was mid-pirouette. Zola laughed. That is right. I could never see it. Come here, Elias said. I will show you. She wiped her hands on a towel and crossed to the window. Amara looked up from her files, then rose and joined them. The three of them stood together, looking up at the stars, while Elias pointed out the constellations he had once shown two little girls in matching dresses. The astronomy book had traveled through 3 decades of service, through jungles and deserts and places that did not exist on any map. It had survived everything he had survived, and now it was home, being used for its original purpose, teaching his children about the stars. Celeste would have loved this moment. Elias could almost feel her presence beside him, her hand on his shoulder, her voice in his ear. You did it. You came home. I am so proud of you. He blinked back tears and continued pointing at the sky. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible and that heroes can be found in the most unexpected places, please subscribe to our channel. Share in the comments your thoughts on this story, and tell us, who is the quiet hero in your life who deserves recognition? Sometimes the greatest warriors are not the ones still in uniform. They're the ones who find the courage to keep going, to accept help, to come home. Every person you pass on the street has a story. Some of them might just be legendary. Thank you for watching. And in a small apartment in Baltimore, a father and his daughters stood at a window, learning the names of stars, building a future from the ashes of the past, one constellation at a time.